Today's March 10th, 2024. Current Bitcoin price is $69,735.
Welcome to the BitBite podcast, your source for news and information about Bitcoin and the cryptocurrency space. This podcast is meant for educational and entertainment purposes only and is not financial advice.
Happy Sunday, Rick.
Oh, it's a great Sunday.
How's your weekend been going?
Oh, not bad. I mean, I spent all yesterday changing out a water heater, so,
Ooh,
good times.
water heater at the house broke?
Yeah, it started leaking out the drain. I was like, well, I better replace it now.
Yeah. No, that's not fun. How much did you get it for? Were you able to find one relatively cheap or?
They're basically going for about $650, $700, roughly.
Dang. Was it super heavy?
Parts. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. All that buildup that goes on in there.
Yep.
Not a good time. You got it all done though?
Yep. All day.
All day long. Yeah. No, that does not sound like a good time. I mean, it's better that you catch it before it ruptures completely, but that's still, yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Always kind of just sad day.
Yeah, I'm just glad I didn't have to sell any Bitcoin to finance that. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah. No, for sure. That's always that's a plus. And I mean, speaking of, where are we at with our theoretical Bitcoin purchase?
Okay, so basically being pretty close to the all-time high at 69,735. Theoretically, if you bought Bitcoin, and I just said it in an off-the-cuff remark back in October 27th podcast that if you bought now, you're going to do great. And I was not wrong because we put in $3,000 at the time, which would have bought 0.0885 Bitcoin. And at today's price, that $3,000 has turned into $6,172.
Yeah, so we've officially doubled the investment, right?
Officially doubled it.
Yeah. No, it's good to see. And I think something that's important is that, and we don't know this for sure, but I'm pretty sure we still have more room to run. Like, I don't go ahead.
Yeah. Past cycles, I mean, the doubling after you cross the all-time high, which we kissed 70 and then it got swatted back down to like 59 pretty quick. We're working our way back to that. And once it really crosses that new all-time high, I mean, last episode we talked about it, like 3 of the past 4 cycles, it's doubled that new all-time high in about 10 to 18 days.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, something that I kind of wanted to kind of go over on this episode was just basically kind of a brief history for those that may be new to this whole market, or maybe to this bull cycle or to this commodity in general, is that, just a brief history of kind of the bull runs in the past and a little bit about what kind of stimulated them and what kind of took place and just kind of the evolution of those as they've kind of gone on. Just maybe some highlights. I don't know.
Yeah.
So the first one that we're going to look at is from 2010, which is kind of the early days of Bitcoin. And this was the first significant price increase for Bitcoin occurred in 2010 when it moved from being worth fractions of a penny to 8 cents by July of that year. This period marked Bitcoin's introduction to the financial world, albeit on a small scale. The community was small, and the technology was in its infancy, but the seeds of the future growth were planted. This year was pivotal, not just for the valuation surge, but for establishment of Bitcoin's foundational infrastructure. The launch of the first Bitcoin exchange happened, allowing people to trade Bitcoin for fiat currencies, and the first commercial transaction, famously paying 10,000 Bitcoin for 2 pizzas, demonstrated the cryptocurrency's potential as a medium of exchange. These milestones were critical in transitioning Bitcoin from a concept to a functional, albeit niche, currency. So that was before I was even involved in Bitcoin.
Yes. Well, we'd probably heard about it, maybe even discussed it, but we didn't even think about dipping our toes in yet.
Yeah. Like, I mean, maybe I'd heard a mention of it at that point, but it didn't really resonate with me yet. I do kind of wish I would have, but at that time, like that was, you got to think that was probably the early days of like Mt. Gox and stuff like that.
And Mt. Gox was the first exchange, right?
I don't think it was technically the first. I think there was another one before that, but I think Mt. Gox was probably the most famous and then later infamous. Yeah. But the 10,000 pizza things, like that's been like a cautionary tale within Bitcoin that's we've seen repeatedly. And I mean, I've even been subject to something like that where you basically you paid, X amount of Bitcoin, where if you could have just sat on it, you purchased something that was kind of meaningless, but later on down the road, it became worth a lot more money. And that's something that I've had conversations with people that, they're like, well, you can't really do transactions with Bitcoin. And it's like, well, you can, but what happens is you end up looking in the rearview mirror and you regret it.
Yep. That's why there's so many long-term hodlers. It's like fiat keeps going down and the Bitcoin that you have keeps going up. The trade is not great.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of like, that was kind of just the beginning days of Bitcoin. Like it was very, very niche at that point. Like it was very, I think it was just Uber nerds were kind of really buying it. Not that I'm not an Uber nerd, but
just next level Uber nerds.
Yeah. Yeah. Those were the hardcore, like, cause that really is your hardcore, cypherpunks and stuff like that were kind of trading with it at that point.
Right.
Which would bring us into the 2013 peaks. In 2013, Bitcoin experienced two significant price spikes, first reaching $260 in April, then soaring to $1,100 by November, marking its ascent into the public and financial spotlight. This year was pivotal for Bitcoin, seeing increased media coverage and the maturation of its supporting infrastructure, like exchanges and wallets, which simplified trading and storage for users. The Cyprus financial crisis underscored Bitcoin's appeal as a safe haven asset, attracting attention in financially unstable regions. However, the year also faced challenges, notably the collapse of Mt. Gox, highlighting the risks within the cryptocurrency space. Despite this, Bitcoin's recovery demonstrated its resilience and growing acceptance as a decentralized currency, laying a foundation for future growth and adoption. So I want to say, in our other podcasts that we did during that time, 2014 is when I first started to kind of dip my toes in. And I want to say Bitcoin was around $500 at that time.
Yeah. Man, would have been nice to get in at 8 cents, but even $500 at the time, that's pretty.
Well,
Lord.
And I go back to like, as easy as it sounds to say, yeah, you would have been able to keep it during that time. Like, oh, you bought at 8 cents. There wasn't, the only thing really you could do was either have a computer that you just kept that computer only for purchasing your Bitcoin. It didn't do anything else, or you had a paper wallet. Right. Like it wasn't as easy at that time.
Yep. And that's why there's probably like 5 or 6 million Bitcoin that have been lost.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. You hear the horror stories from that time was people who had it on something and then they lost it, or I think even Big Bang episode, there was a Big Bang episode that kind of highlighted something like that where they had it on a thumb drive and they lost the thumb drive and it was worth, millions at that point. And something, that we should have brought up, especially in the early 2010s, was like you could mine Bitcoin relatively easily.
Yeah, no, you could run the laptop of its day and you would be getting a ton, because that's when the Bitcoin was being mined. It was super easy. Nobody else was doing it.
Yeah, you didn't have the hash wars going on. Like there wasn't, ASIC miners weren't really a thing yet. I think they started to kind of become a thing by 2013. 2013, 2014 is where that kind of started. But yeah, I think it was a different time. It would have been a lot harder to keep during that whole time. I don't know what the best solution would have been for that time. I mean, I think even at that time, I don't even think seed phrases were quite a thing yet. I think, it may have started to come a little bit later in the 2013 era, but otherwise you just had that huge string, which was your wallet address.
Well, one thing I think we should talk about, just real brief, is Mt. Gox.
Mm-hmm.
basically what happened there is it was one of the first exchanges. I guess I thought it was the first, and maybe it wasn't the first, but it was originally the Magic the Gathering online exchange. So it was like those Magic card game. That's what it started out as, but they started allowing people to purchase Bitcoin. But if I remember correctly, they got hacked by somebody, and somebody was stealing their Bitcoin, and they just kind of kept it hush hush until somebody figured it out, and then the exchange collapsed, and a lot of people lost all their Bitcoin.
Yeah. They had no security by any means at that time.
Which is they're like the earliest incarnation of FTX.
Yeah. So so just because we kept on bringing it up, the first Bitcoin exchange was called bitcoinmarket.com. And it launched in 2010. I don't think it, was very popular. Like, I don't even think it still exists today, but that was the very first exchange that existed during that time. And I think Mt. Gox just became probably the most well-recognized. But again, so you think about that Magic the Gathering online exchange, right? That should tell you kind of what that market was. You know what I'm saying?
At least for people our age, yeah, for sure.
I mean, that was kind of probably one of the early days of like how nerdy it really was to be into Bitcoin. Not that it's not still nerdy now, but I think probably around 2014 is when we did our first episode where we discussed Bitcoin on a podcast. And there was something about it at that time. So here's the other thing too. Like, a lot of people are like, well, you should have just held on that whole time. That time was very scary for Bitcoin. There wasn't a whole lot of backing. There wasn't a whole lot of adoption. Like, it was starting to happen, but it wasn't quite there yet. It was such an experiment.
Right.
It wasn't the sure thing that it is now, I think, and I can't even say it's a sure thing now, but I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, there was every day that Bitcoin has existed and hasn't become zero is just a little bit more of a fact that it probably will continue to be a thing in the future. And that's probably not very eloquently placed.
Well, I was just going to say that, I mean, especially the infrastructure that supports Bitcoin, it's a decentralized mining network that basically supports it. I mean, what it is now versus what it was back then is two totally different animals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think about that, and I think I remember I was talking to you about it. We were on the phone with each other. I was in Walmart doing something. I remember the conversation, and I told you, I think at that time I was like, well, I didn't throw in a whole lot. I think I put in $100 at the time, and I was like, well, and I've got a recurring buy of $25 every week. I was like, I know it's not a lot, but at least that way, I'm starting to see, what it'll become. And it was a risky bet at that point, but that was kind of where I started with Bitcoin. And I mean, believe me, I probably sold stupid amounts at stupid times doing stupid things, but I think one of the stupidest things is I bought a cell phone with 1/10 of a Bitcoin. So yeah, I mean, and yeah, so that's one of those things now. Again, it's like the pizzas, right? That's like almost a $7,000 Bitcoin today, or a $7,000 cell phone.
Right.
And that's just at this time. Like, ask me again in a year, is it $10,000 cell phone? Yeah. So that kind of takes us through the 2013 peaks. So the funny thing too, like, we're going to go into 2017 through that bull run there. And that was when we had the mainstream breakthrough for Bitcoin. 2017, the bull run is arguably the most memorable for many people, with Bitcoin's price skyrocketing from around $1,000 in January to an all-time high of nearly $20,000 by December. This surge was primarily fueled by the ICO craze, which I remember, and I lost some money on those, increased media attention, and significant influx of retail investors. During this period, Bitcoin's visibility soared to unprecedented levels, making cryptocurrencies a topic of household conversation. So one of the things with the ICO craze, like, that was the early days of, well, obviously it was an ICO, initial coin offering. It was kind of like the crypto market's take on an IPO, which is initial product offering, right?
Yeah.
I think during that time, that's where I kind of stumbled into XRP, got XRP at that time. That's when I kind of convinced one of our mutual friends to actually start buying at that point also. I think he got in right around the $5,000 mark and then went up to like the $20,000 mark. I actually had forgotten that I'd been buying Bitcoin that whole time, you know, that lull between 2013 to 2017. And I was so excited. I was like, oh my God, I may have a bunch of monies. And you know, that rally was insane. I talked to another friend into buying some, and they were just like, oh my God, this thing is crazy. Cause we would sit there and we watched the charts, and it was just, I had never seen anything like that before in my life.
No, that was an epic run.
Yeah.
I mean, from 1,000 to 19.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And it was nuts to see, and just to see the hype behind it. And like, you could put in some money and you were watching it just increase. And I thought for sure at that point, like the cycle, like we wouldn't see it low again. Like I thought the adoption was going to happen.
Unfortunately for you, you were not correct.
I was not correct at all. And then we saw the market tank, which, I mean, I guess at this point now, I've gotten somewhat used to that. Maybe not. I probably have legitimate like PTSD from it. Seeing like just that huge numbers on your balance sheet, unrealized profits that go away in a matter of months, like not even that far away. But then that takes us through to 2020 to 2021. This is where Michael Saylor, Elon Musk, everybody else starts to really kind of talk about Bitcoin. So the late period of 2020 and 2021 marked a historic bull run for Bitcoin, shattering the $20,000 barrier and peaking to over 64,000 in April of 2021. Yeah. This remarkable ascent. Go ahead.
I was going to say, before you get into that, I mean, 2020 was also pretty disastrous.
Yeah.
In the fact, when COVID hit and the lockdowns and everything took a crap, Bitcoin went down to $3,000.
Mm-hmm.
That was kind of the bottom at that time, where, you know, up since 2017, that was the cheapest Bitcoin got.
Yeah, we've never seen it that cheap again during that time.
Yeah, and so it had a pretty good run back. I remember it got to like 8,000 around the halving. It was somewhere in the mid 8s.
Mm-hmm.
But go ahead and continue with the late 2020.
Yeah, so the remarkable ascent was underpinned by a few of institutional investments, signaling a major shift in the perception of Bitcoin from a speculation asset to a legitimate component of diversified investment portfolios. Major corporations, hedge funds, and traditional financial institutions began to embrace Bitcoin, allocating portions of their reserves to cryptocurrency, driven by its potential for high returns, inflation hedge capabilities, and increasing legitimacy as a financial instrument. And you're right, at that time too, but everything got struck by the COVID smackdown, is the way I'm going to put it, right?
Yeah.
So it was scary at that time. I remember sitting out on the back porch when Bitcoin hit $3,000 that day. And I was just like, oh my God. But I knew at that time, I was like, well, I think I bought some more that day. But at that time I was just like, am I a fool? Like, is this going to come back? Like that was such a crazy time when that dropped to 3,000. But I knew within my heart, I was like, no, it's going to come back. I've seen it come back. It'll do it again. And then we started, not too long after that, we started our rise again, right? We saw that K-shaped recovery, and it was across all markets. And the other thing too, during that time, was there was a lot of liquidity, because I mean, at that time too, that's when like interest rates got to basically zero. They were starting to pump all kinds of liquidity into the market. The quantitative easing was going on like hyperdrive.
Yeah. Well, and then you couldn't go out and spend your money.
Yeah. Yeah. And then we started getting stimulus checks, right?
Yeah, I think that was in 2021. But yeah, it was just a weird time. There was a lot of people had a lot of money and they weren't able to spend it. Like, if they managed to keep their job, they were doing great.
Yeah. Yeah. Because that happened a lot. I think about that time too. Like, I kind of lucked out because I got transferred up here at that time. I had just gotten transferred up to Farmington, or back up to here because I was already here before. And everybody that was in one of my branches of the corporation that I work for, they all got their hours cut to where they were only working like 32 hours a week, 33 hours a week. Because I was where I was, because they had to cut the hours because they had to cut salaries. Like, this is salary paid workers, right?
Right.
Everybody that I knew that I worked with, because there was other managers in place, all had their pay reduced. Mine did not, because I was the only manager on site at this location. Wow. And had I been, still in like the bigger city where I'd gotten transferred from, I would have gotten my hours reduced and taken a pay cut. But because I was the only manager on site, I had to continue working full time.
And you really did luck out, because you moved up here right as lockdown, right? You bought your place right before lockdowns went into effect.
Yeah, so I put my house on the market. I was already kind of living up here at that time, but the house got put on the market on the day the lockdowns were announced. Yeah, I remember that. I was on my way down to Hobbs, and the governor had gone on and done the press briefing, and the lockdown had taken place, and yeah, that made it kind of fingernail biting during the lockdown, because I was like, man, like I had seen properties sell like crazy during that time. Like, homes in the area where I was living only lasted on the market for like a week, and when mine went up, it took it like a month, which I mean still isn't horrible, but that was a long time to be like, oh my God, like why is it not wanting to sell? But yeah, I mean, I lucked out. That's all there is to it. And I think you kind of purchased during this time, right?
It was later.
Was it later?
It was later in the year. Yeah.
Well, I mean, but you were in before the bull run really began in 2021, right? You bought in 2020 still.
Yeah, I was laid off. I got a little bit of a severance. And I was like, I'm going to put some money into Bitcoin. And
well, and even for that, like, I mean, just the fact that you were willing to take some of your severance, like when you had lost your job, and be like, oh, I'm going to put it nuts in the market and let's go. Like that was pretty ballsy.
It was actually kind of, I mean, in a lot of ways, it's like, am I stupid? But I just went with it. So I don't know. They gave me enough severance where I could live. I mean, if I really went cheap, I could live off of that for a year. And I had some money in the savings too already. So
yeah. I mean, and that's it, I think it's paid off in the long run for you for sure. And
sure,
it's kind of crazy to think about. So in this little thing here that we have, it says 64,000 by April of 2021. We actually ended up peaking around, it was like 69,000 in November of 2021. But that's like, it depends on what chart you look at that says whether or not we actually crossed the 69,000, because technically right now, sitting at 69,735 is higher than what we were in the previous bull run, which is now going to bring us to this bull run at this time and where we're at right now.
Well, I would just say one thing we should mention before we get to this is it went up to 60,000 in April, but it took a dive somewhere in May down to 35,000.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we saw the retracements
all the way back up to 69 until October or November, whatever.
Yeah,
date the open high was.
Yeah, and that's something it's not often discussed, and a lot of times, like, people want to remember the euphoria of a bull cycle, but there's always been the drawbacks as well, which has been what's been uncommon with this bull cycle so far.
Indeed.
Right now, and we've talked about this before, we had the ETFs. We have the very good possibility that we're going to see a reduction in interest rates here pretty soon. We have, this demand surge that we've never seen before, and the halving coming up. Typically, like, the Bitcoin bull run doesn't kick off till after the halving, right?
Yeah, because the supply that the halving just basically means that every block that's carried out, it rewards X amount of Bitcoin. What is it at right now? 450?
Currently, 900 daily is what's being produced right now. When the halving takes place, it'll go down to 450.
Okay, 900 daily today.
Mm-hmm.
In just a month and a week, like 5 weeks away, roughly, we're going to be cutting that in half. And so the supply drastically goes down, and that usually causes the decrease in supply, the supply and demand chart, price goes up. This is really strange. It usually waits for the kind of this pre-bull market to really begin.
Yeah.
Until after the halving, and we're still 5 weeks away from that.
Yeah. Right now, technically, and this could change. This clock is not completely set in stone, but I think in previous episodes we've talked about it being April 17th. This is now showing April 18th, showing 38 days away. And I think it depends on which kind of clock you're looking at to see. But that goes back to the difficulty adjustments and stuff like that can take place during that time. But we're not quite there yet, and we're already seeing. We're at new all-time highs right now. We haven't had the decisive close. We haven't gotten a close above, the $70,000 mark yet. And I think that's going to be important. We need to see that to really solidify that new all-time high, and then we enter what they call price discovery, right? So, yeah, I don't know what. So, what do you think is going to happen on Monday?
Usually it's pure craziness, and in every other Bitcoin market, I would have told you it's probably going to go down, or it's going to do a little bit of a retrace, gather its wits before the halving, and then go on a tear. These days, every Monday, the past 2 Mondays have been insane.
Yeah.
They've both had demigod candles, right?
Yeah.
As we call it.
Yeah.
And, I don't see any reason why you would not do that. There's just so much appetite. And if anything else, BlackRock and Fidelity are just picking up more money. More money is coming in now.
Yeah.
So
they seem completely undeterred. I think people see the value proposition right now, especially of buying Bitcoin at this price. When you look at the past cycles, you can look at the past history. Considering that we've seen Bitcoin oftentimes double in a very short amount of time once it solidifies above that all-time high, right? It's hard to not want to kind of get a piece of that action. When you have pensions that are possibly looking at being cash flush for the first time in a very long history of their pensions existing, just because they can make a small allocation to Bitcoin, I think that value proposition becomes huge. I think a lot of corporations are going to see because even Tesla, they've sold some of their Bitcoin off, but I think it's actually helped them a lot. MicroStrategy is probably going to become one of the richest companies in the world because of their Bitcoin position. El Salvador has a chance at becoming one of the most wealthiest countries in the world because of their Bitcoin purchase. Yeah, it's hard not to see that and understand that, you would be doing, your fiduciary due diligence by at least allocating a small portion of your treasury reserves into it.
Indeed.
And then the question becomes, do they sell off or do they become hodlers for life at that point?
I imagine there's going to be a little bit of both, but I think, it might be smart to take some money out of the table, but, we were talking about selling your Bitcoin when it was $500 a coin or whatever. And are you going to be smacking yourself in the head because you sold it when it got to 100?
Yeah.
He's like, Bitcoin was only 100,000 back then?
Yeah.
The same conversation just gets repeated every cycle.
Yep.
It's just the numbers higher.
Yeah. And we're not dealing, and I know we've mentioned this, but we're not dealing with the retail anymore. I know institutional players kind of came in a little bit between 2020 to 2021, but with this kind of golden tap by the regulators or the SEC with the ETF approval, and then I think there was also some changes that are going to be coming in accounting practices this year, or that came in this year, for corporations to be able to hold Bitcoin on their balance sheets. It's going to be, I don't know. It's going to be kind of interesting to see how this plays out, because if you have a truly limited supply asset, why wouldn't you want to at least keep what you can. And you're not going to be selling into the frenzy of the speculators or the retail, I should say, not the speculators, but the retail, the frenzy of this retail that are like, oh my God, I'm just going to ride this and then sell off when we get to the peak. This market has totally changed.
Yeah. You know, I did buy a little bit here not that long ago, in basically that is going to be my speculative one. I'm going to mess with this one. There's a portion that I'm hodling forever, but I'm going to make a play this time.
Yeah.
And maybe I'll get smacked down later. You freaking idiot.
Well, I don't know about that. We've got to have, I think there's got to be, we can't go up forever. At least not in a straight line. We can go up forever, but we can't go up in a straight line. You know what I'm saying? And even at some point, even though I just said we can go up forever, that's not true. I think Bitcoin will get to a certain price where it'll become like gold in that sense, where it doesn't really fluctuate much.
Right.
Now, what that price is probably a lot higher than what most people think. We're probably talking about tens of millions of dollars of Bitcoin at that point.
Well, if it had the same market cap as gold, it would basically have to 10x right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that'd be, we're looking at $700,000 per Bitcoin.
Yeah. Well, and that, at that point too, you'd probably see a major move from gold into Bitcoin. We're seeing some of that right now, but we're not seeing the huge allocation yet.
Well, that's the main benefit I think I see over gold is, one, it's for major transactions. Historically, a lot of contracts were actually done in dollars and gold before, the Great Depression. Mm-hmm. And FDR took that ability away. But things were backed up in gold. Well, going forward, things could be backed up in Bitcoin. And it's a lot easier to move Bitcoin than it is gold.
Yeah.
Especially if it's large quantities.
Yeah, it's easier to verify too, right?
Yep, it's easier to verify. And here's the other advantage it has over gold. If gold becomes ridiculously, let's say gold doubled its price, just in a couple weeks, gold mining would go through the roof. There'd be people going and trying to find some gold mines. And they could find some and maybe kind of lower the price a little bit, but they would increase the supply. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter what the price is for Bitcoin. The process continues as always. The difficulty will be adjusted depending on the mining, but the amount of Bitcoin that's being hashed is consistent.
Yeah.
And there's nothing that's going to make that happen faster.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it doesn't matter what you want. Bitcoin's going to do what Bitcoin is programmed to do.
And it's capped at 21 million, and we're already at 19 million.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, there's not a whole lot left, as these halvings continue, because we're going to 450. Then next time we're going to go down to 225. It's like that slowly. We're going to get to where we're getting not even a whole Bitcoin each block, right?
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing too, is this path that we're on is laid out to 2140.
Mm-hmm.
So we still have another 116 years.
Yeah. We won't be around for the end of that.
No.
But progeny may be. And who knows? If they have a Bitcoin, that may be enough on their own, to set something as your family name for a long time to come.
I'm even thinking that you might even have a 10th of a Bitcoin and you might create some type of generational wealth.
Yeah. That I do. I do think that's a possibility. And I talked about that with some of our friends now where, they brought up the fact that, well, if I buy now, there's no way that I'm going to see the incredible gains that you guys have already seen. And it's I've gone back and forth where I'm like, well, maybe you're right, but yeah, you could really be wrong. It may not take a whole lot to be able to generate that generational wealth.
Right.
And that's where it goes back to that. It's almost a moral imperative, where I feel it's a moral imperative to talk to people about Bitcoin. And even if they don't believe it, just buy a little bit of it. Just in case.
Yeah. If you can't buy a 10th, which we're suggesting. In a tenth is kind of arbitrary. I don't know if that's really going to make it, but
well, an tenth is getting harder and harder to get to, anyways.
Yes, it's getting really hard. It's already $7,000 to get to a tenth, and $700 to get 1 million satoshis, which is just 1 cent of a Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So, what? I don't know what else to tell people. You need to not be at zero. Whatever your number is in Bitcoin, it cannot be zero.
And whatever you do have, it's probably not enough.
Yeah. I wouldn't say whatever you do have, it's not enough, but I'm just saying whatever you do get, you want to secure it on a wallet.
Yeah.
And we have those on our website.
Yeah, we do have listings for the LPAL or the Ledger. And if you go through our website, it helps support the channel, helps support us, helps support the podcast. And we get a little bit of a kickback, but you're buying directly from the manufacturer, which I think is always important to reiterate.
Yes. You don't want to be using a secondhand wallet, especially if they're giving you secondhand keys. No.
And also, if you decide to go through that journey, go ahead and sign up for our newsletter on our website as well. And you will get a free kind of a self-custody checklist that'll help you help hold your hand while you go through the process, because it can be nerve-wracking, especially when you're moving around that kind of money, right?
Right. No, it's nerve-wracking.
Yep. Yeah. And even like to this day, like I still double check, triple check before I make any moves with the hardware wallets or anything like that. So it's always something to keep in mind. But really, yeah, I feel like we figured we would bring up kind of a history of Bitcoin today.
Yep.
Or bull cycles, I should say.
Bull cycles. And it looks like we're kind of at the precipice of one. Maybe there's going to be a drawdown in the future. If there is a drawdown, I really suggest people try and jump on as soon as they can.
Yeah.
Because this may be the last drawdown we've seen for a while.
Yeah. And when we talk about that, basically a tenth of a Bitcoin, $7,000, I don't see that getting any cheaper. That's probably going to get to where it's 14,000 here pretty soon. Relatively soon, I should say. And just that gets harder and harder to be able to, for the average person to be able to get a hold of.
Right. Yep. This may be the last days of Bitcoin being quote unquote cheap. I know $70,000 is not cheap, but it will look it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the other thing too, like all that history stuff that we've looked at with the Bitcoin chart. Every time when you look at the Bitcoin chart and you see those little bitty spikes that happened in the past, those were huge spikes like what we see. And then they just kind of get diminutive as time goes on because the new spike becomes higher and higher. So,
right.
Yeah. Anything else you wanted to bring up today?
Just sign up for the newsletter. I'll be cranking some out. Kind of talked about the fact that Bitcoin doubled after it crossed the all-time high, it would double in 18 days, at least 3 of the past 4 cycles. So,
yeah. No, that was a very good newsletter you put out this last week. So, thank you all for listening, and we do hope that if you are finding this podcast helpful in any way, please share it with somebody. Just word of mouth. Let them know. Something they can listen to. We try not to be too crazy, but I think it's good information to have, at least to think about, even if you're not a believer yet. So,
indeed.
We'll talk to y'all soon.
Bye.